And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight. With a new president-elect he's about to take office in May, South Korea embarks on a new chapter of foreign policy. After 5 years of solely focusing on improving ties with North Korea, using all means of national resources and diplomacy to get there, the incoming Yoon administration is expected to take greater interest in issues beyond the Korean Peninsula and broaden the country's role in global governance, supporting the values of the free world. We discuss what to expect from Korea's top foreign policy maker to be, and for this, I'm very pleased to be joined by KIM Jae-chun, Dean and Professor of Sogang University's Graduate School of International Studies. We also connect with REVERE, former Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs and currently Senior Advisor with the Albright Stonebridge Group. A very warm welcome to you both. It's very wonderful to see you on this incredibly exciting morning after election night. And, well, beginning with you, Professor Kim. Now, first of all, how do you think the president-elect, Yoon Suk-yeol, will set the tone for South Korea's foreign relations, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, given his greater enthusiasm for Quad and regional initiatives led by the United States?
There's going to be significant changes in South Korea's foreign relations under the Yoon Suk-yeol government. And one of those changes will be South Korea's policy to the Indo-Pacific region. Sure, Moon Jae-in government has what is known as the New Southern Policy that covers Southeast Asian region, but New Southern Policy has been limited to economic relations with ASEAN countries. Also, Moon Jae-in government has been a little bit cautious in reaching out to the region, to the Indo-Pacific region, and then reaching out to the other liberal-minded countries because I believe that the Moon Jae-in government thought that South Korea actively engaging in Indo-Pacific region would be viewed as compromising China's strategic interests. In contrast, President-elect Yoon made it very clear a number of times that South Korea would engage in Indo-Pacific region more proactively. His government would reach out to the like-minded countries in the region and cooperate with Quad in more proactive manner. You know, Quad has a number of working groups on COVID, working group on infrastructure building, working group on climate change, and what have you, really. Let's not forget a working group on high-tech industry. And Mr. Yoon pledged that under his administration, South Korea would participate in virtually all these working groups. So I think it's quite possible for the Yoon government, future Yoon government, to upgrade this New Southern Policy, upgrade it to South Korean version of Indo-Pacific strategy, because Yoon government would understand how important it is for South Korea to engage in the Pacific region.
So hopefully a lot of new collaborations to look forward to. And, well, Mr. REVERE, thanks for joining us from Valencia. And, well, a congressional report on US-South Korea relations released last month in Washington revealed how bilateral ties between the two countries were rather bumpy during the Moon administration, which tended to show a strong preference for pursuing inter-Korean relations above any other agenda. How do you think President-elect Yoon will set the tone for bilateral ties?
Well, it's no secret that there have been a number of bumps on the road as U.S.-ROK relations have proceeded over the last 5 years. My sense is that President-elect Yoon and President Biden are more often than not going to be on the same page on a wide range of issues, issues that occasionally divided Washington and Seoul over the last 5 years. The appropriate role, for example, of sanctions in dealing with North Korea, the relative prioritization of North-South engagement and denuclearization, the need for military exercises to keep our readiness up, the deployment of THAAD systems, for example. On all of those things, there were some marked differences between Washington and Seoul. But my sense is, listening to the president-elect, reading everything that he's written and knowing some of his advisors, by and large, I think you're going to see two leaders as they manage this incredibly important alliance. You'll see these two leaders mostly on the same page on these issues, starting from the same place and looking at these issues from generally the same perspective, which means that it's going to be a lot easier, I think, to make progress on all of these issues and a number of other issues going forward.
And South Korea's greatest security issue, of course, is dealing with a nuclear North. And Professor Kim, President Moon's North Korea policy was widely regarded as an abject failure, really, after 5 years. And, well, how is President-elect Yoon going to do things differently in handling inter-Korean relations and, of course, pursuing denuclearization talks?
I think there's going to be a big change in South Korea's North Korea policy as well. For one thing, Mr. Yoon, President-elect Yoon, would separate North Korea's human rights issues from inter-Korean diplomacy and inter-Korean exchanges and cooperation, because he said a number of times that South Korea would have to approach North Korea's human rights issues from universalist standpoint. In that respect, North Korea's human rights situation is no exception here, you know. So it shouldn't come as a big surprise if Yoon takes a tougher stance on North Korea's human rights issues. And inter-Korean economic cooperation and economic projects, they will have to wait. They will have to wait for now. President Moon Jae-in believed that inter-Korean cooperation will have to come first. You know, inter-Korean cooperation will lead to inter-Korean reconciliation, and inter-Korean reconciliation would lead to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, if not North Korea. Yoon believes that it should be the other way around. There's got to be some real progress in North Korea's denuclearization, and then we can work on economic projects in earnest. The problem with President Moon's approach to North Korea and President Moon's foreign policy was that North Korea has been always top priority, you know, sometimes at the cost of sacrificing other important foreign relations and foreign policies. You know, for instance, President Moon used most of his foreign policy capital to push forward, to have this declaration of an end to the Korean War with North Koreans. Yoon, I think, also believes that maintaining amicable relations with North Koreans is important, but there are times when we have to be tough on North Korea, and there are times when there are more important foreign policy issues to South Korea. And I think, as Secretary REVERE said, President-elect Yoon is going to approach these foreign policy issues within the framework of ROK-US alliance partnership.
And Mr. REVERE, well, Yoon's pledged to reset ties with China and also consider installing an extra THAAD system in South Korea. And such developments, of course, would be scorned by North Korea and Beijing. Should Seoul and Washington then expect more provocations from North Korea and more tension with China?
Well, the track that North Korea is on today is a track that's been set for quite some time, at least since January of last year, when Kim Jong-un announced a whole range of new technologies, nuclear-related and missile-related technologies that North Korea was going to develop. And what North Korea is doing is implementing that game plan. So all of the testing that we've seen, all the deployments that we've seen, all of the hints of things to come, for example, possible nuclear tests, ICBM tests, satellite launches, et cetera, all of those things have been hinted at. And at one point or another, I expect North Korea to go down that path, mainly because they've said they're going down that path. So what we will face in the coming weeks and months is a North Korea determined to implement the game plan laid out by Kim Jong-un. As for China, probably one of the most disturbing developments that we've seen in our relations, when I say our, US and ROK relations, but also the international community of democracies' relations with China, was the February 4th joint statement issued in Beijing between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. That has ominous implications for the US-led alliance system, for NATO, for our East Asian alliances, but also for democracies. And one of the things that we have seen come out of that summit was Vladimir Putin's decision to invade a neighboring democracy. So we are in new and uncharted territory here when it comes to this new Russia-China relationship. And so one of the key priorities, I think, for all democracies in the world, but particularly for the United States and the ROK, will be looking very carefully at Beijing's actions, not just its words, but its actions, to see which way Beijing intends to tilt in the coming years. Is it going to tilt even further towards Moscow? It basically all but endorsed the invasion of Ukraine. But is this the future that Beijing is going to follow? We're going to need to watch that very, very carefully because it has profound, it'll have a profound influence on both of our countries.
And Professor Kim, what do you think Yoon's position is going to be on handling relations with China? And do you think the South Korean public is going to support his stance?
Well, Soo-young, I remember South Korea's former president, Hyun saying that, well, the United States is an important country to South Korea, but there are times when we'll have to say no to the United States. And you take that statement to Yoon's approach to China. I mean, you replace the United States there in that statement with China. I think that's going to be Yoon's policy posture to China, because Yoon certainly believes that there are times when South Korea will have to say no to China. I think President-elect Yoon believes that the Moon Jae-in government has been too compromising to China, sometimes even subservient to China. And one prime example of subservience being Moon Jae-in government promising China that South Korea is not going to deploy another battery of THAAD. South Korea is not going to partake in trilateral security alliance between the United States, South Korea, and Japan. And also South Korea would not partake in the United States missile defense system. Yoon said that those three promises sort of compromise South Korea's sovereign foreign policy rights, and then this would not happen under his government. That said, I don't think Yoon is going to intentionally antagonize China because he understands China's position. China is also an important country to Korea. You asked me whether South Korea would, public would go along with Yoon's posture toward China. I think South Korea probably would go along with Yoon's tougher stance on China because South Korea's public opinion on China now is record low. Is now record low. Public perception, I think, deteriorated, particularly after China's mishandling of Beijing Olympic Games, and also due to growing, strengthening unity between China and North Korea, and China and Russia. And South Korean public doesn't really view this move very favorably.
The Pew Research Center survey actually shows that 77% of South Korean surveyed have a very unfavorable view of China, and that's more than its views of Tokyo, which is quite surprising. Well, speaking of South Korea-Japan relations, Mr. REVERE, relations between South Korea and Japan, they've stayed very acrimonious since 2019, when their ties reached a new low amid a historical dispute followed by a bilateral trade war. And well, Tokyo seems to have been quite reluctant to talk to Seoul, despite Moon's outreach in the further sort of months of the last months of his presidency. But are you more optimistic about the situation changing with Yoon becoming president?
Yes, I am, quite frankly. The foundation of stability and security in Northeast Asia, from an American perspective, are the two alliances that America has with the Republic of Korea and Japan. And that foundation, quite frankly, is not as strong as it should be or could be because of the ongoing acrimony between Tokyo and Seoul. I understand the history. I've served in both countries for many, many years. I understand the difficulties. But quite frankly, from an American perspective, if Seoul and Tokyo are at loggerheads on various issues, it undermines the American perception of what is required to maintain peace and stability in the region. And I think President-elect Yoon understands that. And certainly the people around him, a number of whom are good friends and colleagues of mine of long standing, think they understand that as well. I think it's time for a different approach from Seoul in dealing with Tokyo, but I also think it's time for Tokyo to reciprocate and reach out to the incoming government in a positive way. There is a good foundation, there is a good precedent for positive, constructive relations between Japan and the Republic of Korea, and that was, of course, established between then Prime Minister Obuchi and President Kim Jae-chun. That's a good model, I think, that should serve as a solid foundation going forward, and I hope President Yoon will go down that track, and I hope my friends in Tokyo will reciprocate.
Well, it looks like President-elect Yoon will have a lot of relationships to strengthen and rebuild. And, well, I'm afraid we're out of time today. But before we go, Professor Kim, a very happy birthday to you. What a night. And
wonderful.
Hopefully you'll get more sleep and be able to celebrate your birthday properly. And thank you, Mr. REVERE, for joining us all the way from Valencia and staying up with us to cover this election. And, well, that was Professor KIM Jae-chun, Dean of Sogang University's Graduate School of International Studies, and Evans REVERE, Senior Advisor with the Albright Stonebridge Group. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.